foundational community sports. So I know for a number of folks, this may be you're returning from session one. And for those who are new, we will certainly kind of get you up to speed as quickly as we can. So kindly bear with us, but good morning, good morning, good morning. Very good. So I'm hoping that everyone is able to, are you able to see the PowerPoint? Is everyone able to see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Bravo, bravo.
Yes.
Yep.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
Sounds fabulous. So let me ensure that we are recording. So by all appearances, we are recording. I saw someone's hands up. Can you tell me, Carrie, is there a question?
Sorry, no, it wasn't by accident. Thank you.
That's quite all right. I appreciate the wave. Fair enough. So let's get right into it. I know we are doing our very best to respect the time and ensure that we are staying on track. So I provided the information for your call-in option as well as the information for the first session's PowerPoint presentation, the PDF, and the recording, because we are trying to be as responsive as we possibly can to the feedback you provided in the evaluation. And a few folks asked if the PowerPoint can be presented in advance. So I added today's PowerPoint as well. So because some people simply like to have the PowerPoint to read along with the presentation. I'm hoping that it serves that purpose and not a distraction, so ensure that we can still be as engaged as possible today. But I'm delighted to have you here, so welcome. And to remind you that today's webinar is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. And as is normal, this is a very interactive training. We hope that you provide as much feedback so we get a sense as to what's occurring in the field and how the information that is being provided to you impacts your ability to provide the level of care and the excellent service that you typically do. So we certainly hope that we're able to do that. The slides as well as the link to the recording of this webinar will be sent to you. I'm hoping that if you haven't received it as yet, you will do so soon, but that's the standard practice where you'll be provided that as we go along. So let's just keep it rolling. So as I indicated earlier, I provided some information with regards to the call-in. If you're having challenges with being able to get a video, you have the option of calling using that information, and the ID for the Zoom webinar is there as well. I remind you to kindly do your best to keep the background noises down. You can mute if you're not speaking directly, and you have the option of unmuting when you're ready to provide feedback or to share. You can also do so in the comment in the chat section, so we're able to engage as actively as you can. And if you have your video on, please be reminded to make sure you have that professional appearance, and we can keep things as best as we can. Be reminded as well that this webinar is recorded, so that information will be provided to you subsequently, but we hope that you conduct yourself in a manner that you want to be recorded. Fair enough. So as you know, this is a 6-session, or for those who are new, this is a 6-session series of training and discourse about the golden thread of foundational community support. So we certainly go through the gamut of discussion and subject matter, moving from introduction to the golden thread in psychiatric rehab, right through to providing and documenting the service. So we're looking at the full scope of service creation, implementation, and documentation. So we're going through the full gamut of the manner in which service is provided and what's the expectation in terms of documentation and providing that service in an intentional, guided way in terms of best practices. So as I indicated earlier, session one last week was really to introduce you to the golden thread in psychiatric rehabilitation. So we really focus on those fundamental principles, values, and philosophy behind the provision of all services that are associated with foundational community supports. Today, we are going to focus on the assessment process and prioritizing areas of need so that we have a concept as to how we really take a deep dive into having a better understanding as to the consumer we're serving, the purpose of the service, what strengths that person may be bringing to the process, how we kind of garner that information to better inform our service planning and the provision of services, and then we will proceed through that golden thread process to service provision and how we document that service for the purpose of ensuring that there is a historical review of not only the service, but the outcome of the service and what we may have had to do in terms of modifying it along the way. So today we're going to focus on the assessment process and prioritization of areas of need, and that's going to be followed by individualized service planning next week. So just giving you a sense as to how we are proceeding and what's coming up next. For those who are here for the first time, I want to introduce myself. I am Earl Leach. I am part of a 3-member team from the Rutgers University here in New Jersey that are contracted by DBHR to provide this foundational community supports training for all the participants of this service in Washington. So we are certainly here in New Jersey, but we've done this partnership and this contractual connection for quite a while, so we're familiar with each other. But I am a senior training and consultation specialist with the Department of Psych Rehab and Counseling Professions here at Rutgers School of Health Professions. I am joined by my colleague, Emily Bands, who's going to provide technical support here for me today. And she is also going to be facilitating some of the sessions as we move along. So give a shout out to Emily, and Crystal was present as well last week. So that's part of our team. Myself, Emily, and Crystal will be facilitating this training as we proceed. So we certainly want to take a look at the golden thread as it presents what we have discussed so far. From last week's review, we wanted to kind of give you a concept as to what the golden thread is. And if you can bear with me one moment, I need to jump out of this version and get into it. So if you can bear with me one moment, I will get right back to it. Any questions as it relates to what we're expected to do today? What is it we're striving to achieve today? Any questions? We're going to make sure we're all on the same page. So this is an opportunity for us to...
Will we be getting a PowerPoint from this one? I got something in the thread last time, but I wasn't able to open it.
Actually, if you look in the... Go ahead, Emily.
I did put a link for today's presentation in the chat box. So you should be able to access that. It's one of the last things in the chat from 1234.
Okay. Thank you.
So just let me know if you're able to see that.
Score. Thank you.
Bravo. All right. So let's keep on rolling. So today's review, we want to certainly take a look at what is the golden thread as we discussed it earlier. Anyone care to give us a perspective as to how they perceive the golden thread? What is it you learned from last week? What was the information that you gathered from our discourse about the golden thread last week? Anyone care to venture it? into giving us a perspective as to how you understand the golden thread. What does it mean to you?
It's the lifeline of that person's visions and goals, and like how it ties into everything, and how to practically apply it and help serve others in the process, and also get paid to do it, which is beautiful.
I like that way of kind of making the perfect loop. It's really, you know, and thank you so much, Sabrina, for giving us that perspective. It really speaks to the entire journey the person has undergone within the service provision, right? From the time you engage with that person to hopefully the time the person achieves the goal and wants to transition or needs to transition into a more individual, autonomous way of meeting their needs. And certainly it lends itself to establishing medical necessity so that you can get prior authorization to both provide the service and be reimbursed for it. So it really lends itself, it really gives you a lens as to looking at the service provision, its impact and the outcome, and how it's going to align with the standard expectations of Medicaid and your other payers, how you're going to be paid for what you do, and how you demonstrate that you are providing the best quality of care for that person. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Bravo. Because it's one of those things where I always say, if you're doing something and you don't understand the significance and value and importance of doing it, it's easy to kind of, you know, fall off the bandwagon, so to speak. So you have to have a sense as to why am I doing this and be able to answer that question very concretely. So as we reinforced and reiterated earlier, the golden thread is a Medicaid requirement. It is not, in essence, is not kind of an option. It's something that is required. It reflects the best practice for psychiatric rehabilitation, and is a documentation framework that really illustrates intentional services that is determined to have positive impact on potential outcomes, that person meeting their goal. How do you do what you do, why you do what you do, how you're going to be reimbursed for it, and it provides a framework for when you are going to be audited by Medicaid, that you have a clear understanding as to what their expectations are in terms of what you do, how you do it, and what impact it should have. So it seems like kind of a, you know, beating the same drum, but I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding as to what we do, because as I said before, if you don't fully understand why you're doing what you're doing, it's very difficult to stay motivated doing it. And we'll see that kind of play out, not just in us who are providing the service, but in the people who are on the receiving end of it, so that they understand very clearly why you are actually doing things the way you do it and what it's intended to do for them, and how it's intended to lay a foundation for them to transition through services to the least restrictive level of care. Very good. So we want to have a review of what we discussed last week, certainly. And as I indicated earlier, it's really, everything is really purposeful. Our intent is to really look at what is it that Medicaid requires as it relates to the service we provide, right? The essence is all services need to be driven by the client's goal. That's the way we establish medical necessity. And medical necessity really speaks to that framework of ensuring that the activities, the services, the interventions, everything that we do as providers is really aligned with a established, definitive, concrete need that has, as the word indicates, is necessary. It's not just something we do with a hope that it will work. It's based on a standard way operation, a way of proceeding that has been tested to actually meet the expectations of that person's need, that person's specific condition. We have a way of looking at services that are actually evidence-based to actually address those concerns. So you have to demonstrate that not only you aware of the person's diagnosis and conditions and all the things impacting that person's life, but you're practicing service and supports to that person in a way that has evidence that it has worked. You know, I always think of it from that way of who wants to pay for something that they hope will work? You typically, as a person, you know, are going to actually look at anything that you are receiving or purchasing. You have to have a value base for it. And that's basically what Medicaid is saying. If we're going to pay you to provide a service to the person, you have to demonstrate that you can practice the things that we know will work and give that person the best possible chance of achieving their goals. So it's a Medicaid requirement. It's a requirement that enables us to get prior authorization, which is that permission to provide a service with an understanding that we're going to be paid. And it's also a standard that allows us, when we are being audited or reviewed by Medicaid and other payers, they're going to have a clear vision of what they're going to be looking for, and you have an understanding as to what you need to provide to ensure that your service is in keeping with standard. Hence the Medicaid requirement. As we talk about also the golden thread of and establishes best practice for psychiatric rehabilitation. The expectation is the service you provide is in alignment with the principles, the values, and the practices of psychiatric rehabilitation. In simple terms, we're talking about ensuring that the service you provide is dedicated to helping that person recover, integrate fully into the community, and actually establish some path towards the quality of life that is desired. So when we speak about psychiatric rehabilitation, we're talking about the goals of recovery, community integration, and quality of life. As we know, the goals that is discerned between you and that person in collaboration is really designed to support that person's recovery, help that person really achieve community integration goals and aspirations, and to really live a meaningful quality life to the best of their abilities. The service is expected to be individualized, persons focused, and collaborative, that engagement in service provision. And the motivation for engaging in that services and pursuing those goals are really derived from that person's identification of the quality of life that is really in keeping with their best chance of living their fullest life. So we're looking at valued life roles that person seeks to either re-engage in, or in some instances to simply identify and start working towards. So we're speaking of valued life roles in a sense when we're talking about the goals that that person may identify. Very good. So we had a learning application. We asked literally between last week and this week that you're able to take an opportunity to practice some specific strategies and to provide some feedback to the forum as to how things went. So you were asked to speak with a client about their valued life roles and to really give us some feedback as to how those engagement may have gone. What are the feedback? What was helpful? What was challenging? What did you learn by asking the questions, and what was challenging in terms of the engagement? So I don't know if many of you had the opportunity to do so, but I'd love you to share if you can.
It necessarily wasn't with a client, but it was my family this weekend, where we had some immense emotional healing and looking at the roles that we've played in each other's lives and the traumas that we had been through, and being able to set, what had happened aside and get together and move forward and be like, I got to call my grandpa an a-hole to his face, but with love.
Wow.
Like, I love you, Grandpa, despite all of these challenges. And then my mom was able to sit down and give him forgiveness, and it deepened all of our relationships. And I've just found this new level of enlightenment that I can't wait to share with others in this process. But they're really figuring out, what those things are, to put aside those barriers.
That is phenomenal. That is stirring. That is inspirational. I think one of the things we certainly gather is the same things that we practice with our consumers in terms of helping them find the motivation to really look inside and really figure out what they want in a life can be used in all aspects of our lives, right? Who does not want, like Sabrina mentioned, who does not want to really have an authentic relationship with someone that is really a genuine sharing as to where you are, where you've been, where you're going, and how you want to do that with the supports of the people that are significant in your life. So it's meaningful in that. That's one of the things we talk about. These skills, it's not going to become part of your toolkit. You're not going to be confident and comfortable using them unless you put them into practice and get that sense. So thank you, Sabrina, for sharing. Adrian, I saw you raise your hand. Take it away.
Yeah, so I work in a supportive housing complex, and we recently got a new resident. And when showing him like how stuff works, I was giving him some rides around it, just show him how to pay rent and stuff. I decided it was a good opportunity to kind of, break the ice on using that valued life roles. And I used the format that we did to explain, my valued life roles to be able to provide services and to help you maintain housing and identify strengths in yourself. And asked him what his valued life roles are. And it was kind of cool because I kind of saw it as a way that it worked for him to kind of break out of his shell and more think about what they are for his situation. And he gave me the answers of, living to, if he wants to live to 100 and be healthy.
Wow.
And he's trying to not get into conflicts and fights, and he wants to get back into, I guess, he spent his career in like the 60s as a music producer. So he wants to get back into doing that. So I found it, as a valuable question to ask, to really dig into when you're still building up that rapport with someone. So it's pretty cool.
That's fantastic. And I think that's exactly what it's meant to do, to really, create a path for a really practical and meaningful discourse. And to start in a place where, I think when I think of it, and we've gotten feedback to that event, no one wants to start your relationship with the other person sounding like the expert on you, right? You want to know that the person is inviting your expertise to inform the process of engagement. And that's what this is really all about. And also to remind people that you see them as inspirational. You see them as strong, empowered people. You couldn't have gotten to any point in your life, particularly adulthood, without having learned something, without having a knowledge, skills, and resource that you can bring to the table when you're addressing a challenge or a concern in your life. Because if you are totally devoid of the things that will help you, it means you're going to be totally dependent on someone else for always rescuing you. And this is not about rescuing. This is about helping people kind of unearth those knowledge, skills, and resources that they can bring to any process to help them recognize first and foremost that they are able, they are capable. And, we all just need a helping hand, but it doesn't mean we're helpless. And that's the message. But that's great. Two fantastic examples there of a powerful way of using the particular approach. So thank you all for sharing. Thank you very much. And I hope, please continue to share if you can in the chat as to how this may have impacted your engagement with your consumers. Absolutely, Yvonne. It's a reminder that goal is empowerment. It's all about helping that person see within themselves the strengths that they bring to any process. So we're going to continue in that mode today, and the hope and the takeaway, the objectives of addressing today's session is really to identify the key components of the assessment process. What is it we do in the assessment process that really informs our efforts of providing the appropriate service, the intentional service, the purposeful services that we will provide? We want to identify assessment best practices. What are those learned practice elements of the whole assessment process that really lends itself to better outcomes? Enable us to get as much information as much as we can to really establish a strength-based collaborative relationship with that person as we help them work towards their goals. And we want to look at and apply the 8 dimensions of wellness to identify strengths and needs, because as we know, even though a person may have specific need in certain areas, it tends to impact other aspects of their lives, right? I always think of it in the sense that if someone has no money or limited funds, it just don't impact their financial life. It impacts all the other areas of their life, right? If you don't have, enough or substantial enough money to really meet the other needs in your life, it impacts your social life. You can't go to the movies if you don't have money to pay the movies, right? You can't do the things you want to do. You can't travel, transportation. There's lots of other areas that is impacted by a identified need or a gap in that person's capabilities or competence. So we want to take a look at the 8 dimensions of wellness in that way and identify strengths and needs that the person may have to inform the service planning component of this. So that's our hope. May sound a little ambitious, but we want to make sure that we have that understanding and that takeaway from today's session. So we want to look at where do we really begin that process of assessment in the golden thread, the path of the golden thread. Because once we have that, we meet the person for the first time, we talk about, why you're seeking services here, we want to know that the assessment process begins really early in that engagement. Because first of all, in order to establish approval for that or authorization for that person to engage in the service, we have to really establish or define and assess for medical necessity. Does that person meet the criteria for the service? Based on their presenting concerns, their presenting problems, does it meet the criteria in terms of medical necessity? And as we know, different states have different definition or criteria for medical necessity. In Washington is very clear and definitive in terms of, having certain medical needs or health needs and certain risk factors are present. And we've talked somewhat about that in our first session. We know people are either going to be identified as having a medical necessity for service based on certain risk factors and certain health needs or limitations that are evident. Also, we want to take a look at really assessing strengths and needs. So as we begin that discourse, is not really freelancing. Someone come into FCS, you don't talk about some other thing. You're talking about, okay, this is the services that FCS provides, and therefore it has to fit in the realm of services that can best address your needs. So the classic example is, someone comes seeking services in FCS, they're not coming here to have specialized cardiology services, right? We're not cardiologists. It's not what we provide. We provide services and supports that are really related to supportive housing and supported employment. So we want to make sure that we're not stepping and reaching way outside of our scope of expertise and knowledge. So we're not, over-promising and under-delivering. And then once we have a sense of that person's strengths and establish medical necessity, we have to look then at what's the identified personal goals, those valued life roles that really inform goal development and goal establishment for that person. So that's the part in which the assessment really has its bedrock. In this aspect, those 3 elements there of the golden thread, even though the golden thread really evolves throughout. But that's where the assessment really is focused. That's the assessment process. What we do know is that we never stop assessing along the way, right? Assessment is not static. It doesn't start here and end there. We're continuously assessing as we provide services and we see progress or we address challenges. Assessment is infinite, is ongoing all the time, but this is where we do the fundamental assessment component of our service. Does that make sense when I say there's a continuous assessing that's going on? Very good. Because people speak oftentimes to Earl, I don't have to do the assessment form anymore, right? And I said, hold on a minute. It's not about the form. The form informs the process. It is not the form, whether or not you have to do the form, but you need to continuously assess whether or not the person is benefiting from the service and whether or not you're continuing in the way in which you're doing it. Very good. So I want to make that very clear. So I want to get a sense so we can basically target a lot of the discourse around what's going to be really meaningful to you. And to do that, I want to get a sense as to what's your role in foundational communities support the assessment process, because not everyone does all of the assessment or even does the assessment. So I want to get a sense as to what's your role in the assessment. And I'm going to use a poll, and I ask if you can certainly provide some feedback in that poll to give us a better sense as to where you are in the process and what's your role in the assessment process altogether. So if you can take a few seconds and just provide me some feedback, and there's some very targeted questions that will really give us a sense as to how the assessment process really impacts your day-to-day role. Very good. We'll give another 15 seconds or so, and then we're going to take a look at the feedback. All right, so let's see, what say you? So the first question is, do you complete foundational community support assessment? And we look at it across the different assessments. So just about half of you said your Mayor Group assessment only. And you know, in many ways it's novel because it's different across different states. In New Jersey, we just do a comprehensive needs assessment. We may not do a specific assessment that is driven by the Medicaid entity or the HMO entity, but I can only speak to Washington, right? This is where we're doing it. So a number of you, like I said, just about half of you said AmeriGroup assessment only. There's a few people that do both, and some people that don't do any assessment, and that's absolutely fine. If you complete the assessment, how confident do you feel completing the assessment? So about 43% of folks said very confident or confident. Some folks who are sometimes confident, sometimes not. I love to ask that question because, you know, it's not always concrete. You could be doing different assessment and have different varying levels of confidence based on what assessment you're doing or with whom you're doing that assessment. So it's good to know, and for some folks, it's not applicable. What do you hope to get out of this training that may improve your confidence or competence with completing assessments? A number of people say, more than half of you said knowledge. And some folks certainly want skills and resources. So fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with me. I certainly appreciate it.
I would have liked to see one more answer on there, but practical application.
Interesting. Tell me more about that. What does that mean to you?
You know, we can have all the knowledge in the world and the resources and the tools, but knowing how to dive in and apply it and help this person grow from their inner motivations.
Mhm.
And, you know, it's like we look at the assessment, we find that foundation, it's that start. And we look at their assets and we look at their, you know, their defects, their barriers, their needs with an unbiased view, right?
Interesting, yeah.
And then when we look at that, we can just start throwing resources whichever direction that they may need, because it's not about us, it's about them connecting to what they need. And
Very
then
good.
beyond that, the person can grow from their own self-sufficiency and realizing that they're capable of doing these things while we walk alongside them to do this.
That's a nice way of describing it. I like that. I like that concept of seeing it from that perspective, because this is, like you said, it's about empowering people to take on more and more of a role in driving their own bus towards getting to the destination of meeting their needs. But that makes sense. I certainly, and I think one of the reasons why we didn't want to ask that question, I don't want to run people off yet, you know, because we're going to talk about the best practices today. So, but that's a good question to ask in terms of understanding what to do, but also knowing how does it feel like in the application and practice of doing so. So certainly that makes sense. But thank you for that. Dacia said, in my role as a case manager, I do functional assessment as the information you've been providing has been definitely been of assistance. Yes, and even if you are not the person charged or responsible with doing the comprehensive assessment, I always think every member of the team contributes to the assessment process, because you bring very nuanced information from whatever point you are in the service application to that person that informs the application process, the assessment process. So don't lend yourself short to believe that you're not part of the assessment if you're not, you know, doing it per se, directly completing that form, but you are informing the process. Whomever is the point person in doing so, you are bringing information that is of vital importance to that process of assessing. Howard, I see your hands up. Go right ahead.
So I'm kind of responding to, I believe, Sabrina or whoever was talking about how do we formulate some things. And I've been doing this for a minute, and I kind of figured out that if you make the assessment more like a conversation, if you make it more casual and you're allowing, the expectation is that you speak, they speak, you speak, they speak, you shape it or frame it in terms of what you're trying to assess. And in that conversation, it gives you permission, or you get a lot of ease in saying, so we got this strength and this goal. And what would you do if you had a blender and you just threw it all in there? What would we end up doing with that? Or come up with some creative way to allow them in the conversation more. And magic happens because they're capable. They've thought of this in various different ways than we think maybe are exactly the same. And they have some ideas, and it just opens up this much broader path for you to, you know, you can go side by side once you're having a conversation and not doing an assessment. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's
spot
it.
on, Howard. You are spot on in the sense that that's part of what Sabrina was alluding to, and certainly I think most of you would say stuff. It's the how, right? And it's there isn't a magic wand. There isn't a magic bullet, right? For every individual or interaction you have may require a nuanced approach. So you have to really have first of all, develop that trusting relationship, that sharing collaborative engagement, so that, as I said before, you're not just completing a form, but you're engaging in a process that allows information to be shared meaningfully to inform the process. And like Kyra says, I don't go line by line. I have a conversation and glean information as I go. This is from years of doing substance use disorder assessments and takes practice. Yes, it is not some magical stuff that you just gain. It takes practice. It's a lot of trial and error. it really requires some guidance and support. And there's some best practices that we'll discuss today. So hopefully that will certainly inform your process, or even give you a sense as to how, you know, you would be more effective in doing so. But thank you for sharing. That's pretty spot on. So when we speak to, there's two significant stages of assessment process in FCS. We have that AmeriGroup form that we have to complete, and that information that really speaks to medical necessity and really establishes kind of the intake to ensure that the person even meets criteria for service access. And then we have the comprehensive assessment that is done at the provider level, at the agency level. So we'll speak to that. When we speak to the AmeriGroup assessment, we're really looking at assessing for those two service entities in terms of ensuring that the person not only meet criteria, but can benefit from those specific services. We look at a supportive housing assessment, as well as the supported employment assessment. When we speak particularly to the supported housing assessment, we're talking about really looking to see whether that person meets the eligibility requirements, which means they have a health need. And the need meets one of the following criteria. The person has a mental health need where there's a need for improvement, stabilization, or prevention of deterioration to functioning that results from that person's mental health condition. And this is done and determined by a licensed behavioral health agency, your agency in most regards. Or the person has a diagnosis of a substance use disorder as determined by meeting one of the higher levels of ASAM criteria for the substance use disorder. Or there's, you know, the person needs assistance with 3 or more activities of daily living, and one or more that requires hands-on supports. And that's done by the CARE, that comprehensive assessment and reporting evaluation guide or structure. Or in many regards, the client is either homeless or an individual with disability, are determined by coordinated entry assessments. So there's some specificity to those assessments that really determines whether or not the person meets a medical necessity for those services. And it's generally a dual criteria that you have to meet in terms of really having that health need based on a mental health condition, a substance use disorder, or having a lengthy stay in institutional level of care, or and that person also requires some support with activities of daily living to the extent that which they can't function well without those supports. Similarly, there are those expectations and standards for supported employment. In many regards, it's an early age. People can start at 16. They haven't had great successes with accessing and sustaining employment without those supports. They also have a health need and some functional impairments that also put them at risk. So those are, as we say, the standard AmeriGroup kind of assessments that serves to guide us in the initial determination of service need. And Daisy says, I've only been doing assessment for a little over a year now, but I find they're a bit easier now that I had to go through a period of trial and error to find a way of assessing. Asking the assessment question that works well. It also depends on the client, and I'm assessing some assessment flow better than others. Absolutely. You can have a great day, you know, knocking out some assessment, and the next day is like pulling teeth. So it varies they have a lot of variables that may impact that. So in understanding that there's two parts of assessment that is critical to FCS, we talk about ensuring that the AmeriGroup's not the form, but the whole assessment process is completed to ensure that medical necessities met and the criteria for services met. And then we look at a comprehensive assessment that is done at your provider level, which may be more like a biopsychosocial, more of a comprehensive way of assessing that person's functions across all areas of their life. Typically, you look at exploring strengths and needs that person may be presenting with, and We also look at a specific, agency, maybe agency-specific assessment form that you use. And thank you, Emily. Emily put the Amera Group assessment forms in the chat, so you have opportunity to access that if it's unfamiliar to you. I really got to look at it. So help me understand, what are some comprehensive assessment tools or approach that your agency uses? Because I get a sense that it may be very different across different agencies. Are there specific comprehensive assessments that are used at your agency, and what may they be? And I'm speaking about assessment forms or tools beyond the Amera Group assessment.
So at Compass, we use like the housing needs assessment that we have here.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's certainly one of them. And I always marvel at the fact that the services in Washington are so diverse and yet, fully reflective of the person's whole life and personhood. So I could imagine certainly a variance in the assessment tools that you use. Daisy says, yes, we use the CARE tool. So that's certainly good. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, at Compass, I know we use the housing stability assessment for people that are working in supportive housing to see what we can do to maintain housing
Okay.
for guests.
That's fantastic. Gail, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, this isn't my side of things, but I was asked to review the tool we created to see if I could think of anything else. And honestly, so I think it was originally based on the Amera Group assessment, but our people like went and like they really like made it comprehensive. I mean, it's just exhaustive, but they don't do it all at once with the client. And so they use this, let's see, what do they call it? They use this kind of format where they may ask the client some probing questions during one meeting, and then they have dialogue that they reestablish trust. So they think of it as like when you ask the client things, you're sort of losing some of your trust points because you're probing into their life, but then you engage with them in a way that builds the trust back, and then you can ask some more probing questions. And so they just kind of like slowly move through that comprehensive assessment over a period of time. They don't try to force it at all, or, they try to make it like a natural sort of dialogue with the client. And the client doesn't necessarily, I mean, I don't know how, if they probably do tell the client, I'm writing all of this down on this thing.
Okay.
But they don't just sit there and go through all these exhaustive questions with them and like for 45 minutes or more. So,
and that certainly makes sense. Like I said, and there's different ways of doing it. There's different manner in which it's done, different tools that are used. So there's no perfect way of doing it. I think once it informs the process and allows the service providers and the service recipient to really have a good marriage and a good relationship that is driven by information on strengths and values and principles and the things that people want in life. And that's what it's about. So there is no, I can't speak to a specific assessment tool that is the best and one that isn't. It's the process. And I think, as you said, Gail, it should be ongoing. It should be a living document and a perpetual process. It never ends, because today that person may be in this space, tomorrow they may be in a different way. They may even have a different way of really speaking to their experience on different days. So you're spot on in that sense that it should be really an ongoing, perpetual process. And I'm glad that people are sharing. They've used different versions. Some people use the hospital design, biopsychosocial, the FCS, IPS and pathways. So there's lots of different tools. And I think the most important thing is no one should leave here thinking that I have the best tool or the person thinking I have the worst tool. It's the process and how it informs your ability to serve that person the best way possible. So that's the most important aspect. So I hope that really lends itself to what we do. But we know we certainly have to complete the AmeriGroup assessment in order to ensure that service is even viable for that person. And when we speak to the AmeriGroup assessment, it really established that medical necessity. I spoke about earlier, we're talking about health need. We're talking about, does that person have a health need that really lends itself to them improving it in their way of functioning in the community, stabilization and prevention of deterioration. And that has a lot to do with mental health conditions, or substance use conditions, or homelessness, or simply having tremendous impairments in functioning in the community. We speak to specific risk factors we've talked about at length, whether substance use or a mental health condition that is impairing, dysfunction in the person's role performance, and we speak to that in terms of valued life role. Is that person able to really function in that role? What are the impediments? What are the supports that they need? And has that person have a history or a current state of being institutionalized for a lengthy period of time and therefore requires some scaffolding and some supports to really function effectively in the community? So that's kind of the mainstay, and we certainly can speak to what are some of the health needs or risk factors for your consumers that are more prevalent. But based on the AmeriGroup assessment, can you give me some insight as to what are some of the health needs that are the most prevalent in your neck of the woods, in your service clientele? What are some of the needs that are really the most prominent that you see? Substance use disorder. I wasn't surprised. I was expecting that. I could have predicted that would be the first on it, and that's very classic, yeah. Because as we know, the substance use disorders really have a profound impact on all areas of that person's life. Have housing, their medical needs, justice involvement, assistance with daily living activities, and substance use disorder. So yes, there's that collage oftentimes. And, classically, as we know, very rarely do you have consumers or people that you serve that are presenting with a single risk factor or a single health need, right? Oftentimes it's concomitant. It's oftentimes running alongside each other. Shelters and showers, mental health and assistance with ADL, dental, podiatry, pain management. So you're dealing with, a lot of needs that are even expand into those metabolic concerns in a person's life, right? Beyond simply substance use or mental health conditions, people have health needs that are either chronic or oftentimes acute. And we look at transportation, food stability, medical insurance. You talk about receiving SSI, SSDI. So there's a great deal of needs. That's great. So let's look at the comprehensive need assessment as it presents. When we're speaking about assessing comprehensively or concrete, in that way across all the domains of that person's life, we're talking about really looking at exploring that person's past and current experiences and interests. What is it that they've done in the past? What has been challenges in the past? How they have address those things, what coping mechanisms they've developed, what coping mechanisms they need, what has worked, what kind of supports has helped, what kind of supports didn't help. So you want to really perform a deep dive into the areas of need that a person identifies. And that's what we do in terms of the assessment. And hopefully the information that is gathered from really taking a deep dive into person's past experience with services or past experiences with specific challenge or impairments, we hope that, and the plan is that gathering that information should really inform a process of identifying goals to include in the individualized service plan. The assessment is really designed to inform goal identification, goal formulation, and thus a service plan that is designed to address those specific individualized needs and goals established within that process. And what needs to be complete? It needs to be complete and accurate, because we want to get as much information as we can before we embark on that process of developing an individualized service plan. Because the worst thing is just to get as limited preliminary information as can, then you jump to the first thing that basically raises your alarm or concern as that a person's need. Because even though that may be prominent, oftentimes what we find is when someone presents to you simply with a housing need, right? Let's use the example, I'm homeless, I don't have housing, or I don't have affordable or permanent housing. If you simply jump off and run into, okay, let's get you some housing, let's do what we can to get you housing, you may miss the entire boat, because the housing instability may be a symptom of other things going on in that person's life. Exactly, Kyra says, so many layers to unravel. So oftentimes the presenting, what may appear to be the presenting problem may not be the only challenge or area of need that needs to be addressed. So that it's important to note that as much as it seems intuitive to just say, okay, if we can address this first need that you speak up to, we'll have a sense of accomplishment. You may actually be defeating the purpose by just jumping at the first, that first bell that rings. If you just jump to the first bell, you may be missing the entire boat. So you need to ensure that you're really doing a deep dive and getting a good sense of the person's history, strengths, valued life roles, so that you can really inform the goal development and goal formulation to address those needs. And it just says you have to ask, what does that look like to them, and consider individual barriers. Absolutely. Because barriers may be nuanced to a person, or impairments may be nuanced to a person, or people may take some time before they feel comfortable really sharing with you what really bothers them, what's really challenging in their lives. That concept of people may actually only be giving you as much information as they think you need to hear to get a specific thing met, as opposed to really trusting you enough to share with you all the challenges that are really impacting their lives. So the question then is, what might impact your the accuracy or completeness of an assessment? Why might an assessment not be complete or accurate? What are some of the potential challenges to accuracy and completeness? Daniel says, client may not always address their immediate needs versus their own priorities. Our job as providers to inform that their immediate needs are priorities. Spot on. Supporting documents may certainly, impact completeness. Yeah. You want to make sure that you get as much information from collateral sources or referral sources as you can to allow you to have a sense as to the person's journey to this point. And that does not mean that you have to go into the process automatically assuming that the person is going to be deceitful or lie to you or not give you as much information. Oftentimes people may have challenges with being their own historian of their lives because of many reasons, whether it's cognitive or whether it's just experiential or trust, lots of reasons why, you know, we as human beings don't automatically share with a total stranger all the things that are in our lives. It's just not natural for us to do so. And Jamie says people lie, especially if they're court compelled. And as true as that is, I always like to reframe it in the way. Because people don't tell you either the full truth or the specific truth because it may meet a specific need. Because I'll tell you, if I know that accessing housing through your service is going to be impaired by me telling you my criminal history, why would I tell you my criminal history if I really want housing from your provider? Just think of it. It's just natural for us to speak to what we know is going to get us the things we need from the people who provide us those things, right? I don't think, and I speak to it in the sense of an analogy like a relationship. If we're trying to, you know, connect with a person through any relationship, we don't necessarily tell them all our faults and all our dirty secrets first. We try to present a good picture of ourselves. And then we hope that we'll build up enough trust and compassion that we can then tell them about those little things that are not as brilliant and bright as we present ourselves. That's human condition. And there's time limits. Kelly says that, yes. Sometimes the time within you allotted to you to complete that assessment may be impairing. It may not have enough time to get a full story. And Lindsay says, client may not want to open up, to be honest. Yes, and that speaks to you haven't developed enough trust for me to lay out all my stories. Or I may have told the same story about my life 135 times before. I feel exhausted saying the same story to another provider. If anyone has been in service for a long time, it's a lot to tell the same story of your life over and over again. I don't know about you, but have you ever had this experience where you're telling a story about something in your life and you've spoken about it so often, you realize that you're even telling variances of it, different versions of it, because each time you tell it, you may add and subtract something. And before you know it, you're not even telling the same story about your own life. Have you ever had that experience where you're telling someone the same thing and it's like, wait, hold on a minute. I added and subtracted without even being conscious of it. It's natural for us to oftentimes do that. So that's the kind of the process of doing that. And really, we have to be conscientious that we don't take it personally or get so defensive when someone is not ready to share. Because I always say, you have to do some work. It's not expected to be easy. It shouldn't be easy. You should be more concerned when it's easy. So you want to be able to develop that trusting relationship and really allow for some time to really get the most out of that information. And that's true, Sasha. I think you hit it spot on. Who is to say that what they're saying isn't their own truth? That is absolutely spot on. We all have our perception of the truth, and what is true to me may not be actually within your frame of reference and your frame of seeing it from that position. So yeah. Because if someone hasn't come to grips with the reality of their mental health condition, they may say to you when you ask them, do you have a history of a chronic mental illness? The person may be like, no, I'm not mentally ill. Who says I'm mentally ill? Because they may associate accepting or acknowledging a mental health condition with being less than, with being stigmatized or discriminated against. So it may be difficult to share that reality, or the person may not have come to grips with that reality yet. So it's where that person is in terms of their readiness to really engage with you in a meaningful, authentic way. So as we spoke about, what are some of the best practices for assessment? As we know, the assessment process is often nuanced, is often relative to where we are in our own skill set, in our own confidence, similarly with a client in terms of where they are, in terms of the trust in this relationship, or where they are in their readiness to acknowledge certain things in their life. So we have to have some guidance, some sense of how you do this with the possibility of the best results based on practice, based on, you know, what research has provided to us in terms of information as to what's best practice. So when we speak the best practices for assessments, we want to speak about ensuring that we're including all available information. So we want to make sure that we gather as much information from as many sources as possible. Now, that does not mean that every source that the information is coming from is, you know, is enough to really speak to the fact of who that person is. That person still has to inform you in that way. But the more information you have, the more of an informed way of even asking the right questions and asking the provocative questions, or asking the questions that are going to inspire that person to really look deeper within themselves. We want to make sure that we're getting as much information as possible. You want to focus on wellness over deficits. Go ahead, Howard.
You were talking about getting information, you know, doing the assessment and gathering information. And a lot of times I kind of backed into this wherein people just say things that that aren't answers to questions, but they say things. And I finally figured out that those were things that were important to them. Like they used to call me Buddy, is the example that I'm working with. So I got a guy pretty intense, kind of scary, assaultive history. And he said, yeah, I was a good basketball player when I was in my previous situation, and I grew up doing this and that and the other. My nickname was Buddy. Everybody knows me as Buddy. Buddy. So I said, well, that's pretty important. So I wrote down Buddy. And a week or two later, we were in a confrontational situation. And for some reason, I can't explain. I said, so what would Buddy do? Or so I mentioned Buddy, and he calmed down completely. And he said, Buddy's a good dude. So I apologize. Let me talk to you later. So write down everything they tell you, just in case you run into that anomaly, because it usually does resonate with them, even if it doesn't make sense to you. I like 57 Chevys. Banana cream pie is my favorite. Key lime, you know, that kind of stuff. Write it all down. It'll come back to help you out later. I assure you.
I agree. Fantastic. That's so true, Howard. I think it speaks to the fact that you connect to that person on a personal level. If they've shared something that's significant to you, you know, they're saying to you, I prefer to be called by a specific name that gives me a sense of personhood, so that you're not calling me client. I'm not a number. I'm not just, you know, this innocuous thing. I have a purpose. I have a individuality to me that I need you to acknowledge. Yes, it's important to acknowledge that. And like you said,
it's an identity for them that is significant. And it's oftentimes, I missed it. I didn't catch it when he gave it to me. I don't know why I said it, but it was a life lesson and a learning point. Anyway.
I agree. Makes sense. Spot on. And that speaks to it. I think I love the experiential nature of your feedback, really giving me some insight as to what you see out there and how it impacts things. Because, yeah, you know, we can train and teach you this stuff without looking at how it's really already impacting you, what you do already, so that, you said over and over again, this training has to be purposeful and meaningful. It has to inform your processes. It's not just something to have standing out there. We want it to be meaningful and purposeful to you. Victoria, I see you have your hands up. Go right ahead.
Hey guys, yeah, the best thing that I have shared, I'm originally from England, so as soon as they hear an accent, that usually gets their attention. But I actually have a pretty extensive background in recovery and ran a nonprofit for sober living for women in Texas. And just when I speak to somebody that I know has identified with an SUD or a mental health issue, I do share a little bit about my experience and how I have sometimes said, you're not talking to a stranger here. I'm a woman very familiar with the recovery world, and I want to help you as best as I possibly can. And the more information that you share with me, the more I can help you, and I know it's difficult to talk about, and we're here to help. So the more information that you feel comfortable sharing, I also like to let them know that it's just a personal phone call. Like, it's just me and you on the phone, and give them some safety and some secure, almost, making them feel better that they're not on the phone and I'm in like a call center or something, that I'm actually just talking to them. It's just us, and try and find some common ground, some things that you can relate to them on that maybe you've experienced in your own life. Because I have had a lot of times where they are completely shut down. They've become a number in the system. They don't want to disclose that they've struggled with drugs or alcohol or abuse, for example, and they are closed off very, very quickly. And understanding that, I have experienced some of these things myself, and I know people that have, and I have been able to help them. And then I share some success stories about clients that I've had come through that, I've talked to from treatment centers that have come out and that they've gone on to, gotten into transitional housing, and give them some hope that it almost unlocks their prison is the words that I use. That, they feel that, all right, maybe this person can actually help me. Maybe I can trust her, and maybe I can share these things. And then I get all the information to, and then I tell them, like, do you have any documentation of any of this? Do you have pictures of any prescription medications? Do you have a physician? Anything like that that you can send me? I usually get documentation sent as soon as I complete the assessment, and then I send that into a mirror group, and that helps the approval come through. And my approval rates have increased dramatically because of that, because they get that hope. And I don't want to give them false hope. I do tell them, like, there is a very good chance that this can get denied, but if it does, if you submit documentation to me, I can at least try and fight for you. And that has been my experience. That has really, really helped them be more honest, them feel more comfortable, and also get more documentation to get people through the system.
I thank you so much, Victoria. That was really
Thank you for letting me
enlightening
share.
in that sense. Absolutely, I appreciate it. I think you mentioned two salient points there, which is you have to step into that relationship with that person in an authentic way. Doesn't mean you have to share your whole life or mimic some connection with a person, but you have to lay out that, listen, you're not just some person off the street. You bring knowledge, skills, and resource that can inform that person's process. And also that you can empathize.
I just really wanted to piggyback off what Victoria was saying, it's
Sure.
knowing when to share that we've been there too. We've had those same feelings that the shame and guilt and disconnectedness that they're feeling is not serving a purpose anymore. And that, we get to show with our actions by showing up that people are willing to advocate for them, regardless of what barriers they think they have.
Agree. And I think that's the big thing, everyone, regardless, you don't have to have a impairing mental health condition or substance use or homeless to know what fear is like, to know what uncertainty is like, to know what not feeling at your best is like, right? Just our life experience informs those processes. So there's so much common ground that we can all, connect on. I think it's just a matter of understanding when you're looking at someone, you're asking them to reveal to you their most critical aspect of their lives, that you have to have some compassion and a sense that it is tough for people to share all the information in their lives. It's not directed at you personally. They're not trying to deceive you or undermine your efforts. It's just very tough to be forthcoming about everything that is, oftentimes in your worst state to a total stranger. So you have to give some credence to that connection. And if you can connect at a certain point, it really helps the process. But I agree, sharing is phenomenal. It's important to recognize that sometimes people need to know that you're not only going to be there to offer professional support, but a reasonable shoulder they can actually speak to what their challenge is in the moment. That's good. So what's important when we speak to focusing on wellness over deficits is to really, first and foremost, take a look at what that person may be bringing as a strength. I always say, what's the first thing about people who have been homeless for a while? What's the first strength that they present with? Even if they don't articulate that or speak to that. What about surviving on the street? That is a strength.
Yeah. That's how they say they're survivors.
Absolutely. Survival skills, resilience, determination, persistence, perseverance. It takes, I think that's important to first realize. It takes a hell of a lot to survive on the street. So when someone steps into your scope and into your and says, listen, I have experienced homelessness, but I'm standing here, to me, automatically that lends itself to some kudos. You can in that moment say, thank you for staying the course. Thank you for believing, for having hope, for being resilient, to being determined, to wanting more than your current circumstances lend itself to. And it makes a significant difference when the first thing you tell a person is what the strengths and possibilities you see in them, as opposed to the first thing you say is, well, I see you have a mental health disorder. What can I do for you? That's what people hear, that they don't want to hear very often. So we want to focus on wellness. What is it about you that you're already striving for wellness, as opposed to all the problems you have, all the deficits that speaks to your reason for being here? And Kelly says MacGyver skills. Yes. Folks who have experienced homelessness for an extended period of time develop a tremendous amount of skills that are oftentimes very applicable to surviving on the street. Yes, and unconditional positive regard. When people can hear that from you and feel that from you and experience that from you, it lends itself to the possibility of greater trust. When you can see that person for who they are in that moment and not judge them by their past and experiences or their shortcomings, speaks a lot to what potentially a relationship with you can be. Because I always tell people, you're not just providing a service. You are asking that person to be in a relationship with you and trust you to support them and to show up for them. So that's the message I want to stay in your head when you are engaging with a person, particularly in the assessment process. Remember, you are asking that person to step into a relationship with you, to trust you, to believe in you, and to also believe in themselves. It's a lot to ask. So you have to show some level of regard for that, how challenging that may be. Be strengths-based, identify unmet needs. So you have to start with the strength that the person's bringing and then look at, okay, hey, I understand that you're speaking to, the fact that you don't have a domicile, you don't have a permanent home at this time, but it appears as though, you've not only have you survived, you're showing up here, your clothes seems to be, in good condition. You have a sense of purpose and hope. You know what you want. You have identified where you'd prefer to live, given your experiences. Lots of information that person can bring that can inform that process. So those are critical best practices, nuanced approaches to conducting an assessment that will really lend itself to, you know, giving that relationship, that premise, a really fortified sense in the early phases. Because particularly when you're doing assessments, the first impression speaks loudly to that person. So when we speak of really ensuring that we have and include all information available, we really speak to the person's self-report. What are they saying to you? What responses are in conflict with the observations? And that's a critical element of assessing. If you have a referral package that is saying one thing and the person is reporting another in contradiction to what the actual referral information is, it's important to actually clarify that. Now, that does not mean that you'll always get a response that really enlightens you, but it's important to share that with that person. Hi, James. I know, you know, I'm really happy that you took the time to really share with me some of the challenges you've had. I would like to bring this to your attention and get your feedback as to what your position is on this. I noticed here in your referral source from Hospital B that you were diagnosed at, you know, in 1997 with schizophrenia. Are you familiar with that? Is that something that you are familiar with? I noticed in your feedback to me, you mentioned that you weren't certain what was your specific diagnosis. Does that ring a bell for you? Does that make sense in terms of how you really address that without actually saying, hey, James, looks like you're lying and not telling me the truth because the referral source says you have schizophrenia. You're saying you don't. How does that make any sense? So it's really, and I think someone alluded to it earlier, having that conversation and not being afraid to share variances in information without judgment. Asking that person to clarify that as opposed to judging them in terms of whether they're being honest or not. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you? Fantastic. You also want to look at your staff observation. You know, what isn't being said? What's been worked on in the past? So you want to make sure that you're asking those questions. You want to clarify things. You want to ensure that you get a sense of where you want to dig some more. If the specific information that you have already doesn't really give comprehensive information, you want to be able to dig deeper, and you want to do so thoughtfully and compassionately. Fantastic, Brian says, reflect rather than project. I love. I'm glad that you like the example, but we want to make sure that you're trying to gather as much information as you can, and don't be afraid to probe a little further, thoughtfully. Referral and intake information, what's included, what's missing. The person said to you, listen, I just got discharged from the hospital, but you don't see a discharge summary in that person's package. What is important to do in that moment? What would you do if you're in that situation where the person is saying to you, I just came out of the hospital, I spent, 5 days in the hospital, but you're looking at the referral information and it doesn't have a discharge summary as to what was, go ahead.
Ask them what need they needed met for them to go to the hospital in the first place.
Yes, tell me about your experience in the hospital. What was that like? What got you to the hospital? What spurred you to go to the hospital? How did you get to the hospital? Because that's another significant information. It could have been the person was, involuntarily taken to the hospital or sent. So you certainly need to gather as much information in that sense. And once again, without judgment, without projecting, in a thoughtful way, in a way that really lends itself to, listen, I want to get to know you and your circumstance as best as you can. That's how I help you best. What is the most helpful source of information for you from these options. What informs you the most from these options?
To
Is
put
the
in effort where it's needed and to step back and let them do the rest.
Yeah. And always remember that not every service that person engage in necessarily share all the information. So the person may actually be telling you the truth when they say, I don't know what I received at that specific place. You know, I can't recall what medications I had. I can't recall if I had an x-ray or did they do a brain scan. I just knew I fell and hit my head and they said I had a concussion and then they tell me to leave after 3 days. These things happen. Don't idealize a service to the point where you may be missing information, where you believe, oh, they don't do that. You don't know that person's particular experience. You have to be open-minded. Absolutely. Be supportive and not try to direct that person's situation. So I'm hoping that from all of these sources, you really have a good collage, a good collection, a comprehensive understanding of the person's current circumstance and challenges to really inform your process. And when we're trying to get self-report from someone, we want to make sure that we're being very careful and use some of these guidance to support you and help you in that process, right? Be aware of too many closed-ended questions. You don't want to, because the person is, you know, if they're tired or exhausted or just had enough, yes, no, you don't get a lot of information from that. You want to use open-ended questions. What is your income source? Where do you live? And some of these are very common on the AmeriGroup assessment. You want to start with open-ended questions, really inspire and promote conversations so that I think someone made a great statement about it. It's more of a conversation than an interrogation. Tell me about your work, your last work experience, as opposed to have you ever worked and where did you work? You want to get that information in a more thoughtful, compassionate way. And what are the best practices on comprehensive assessment? You want to make sure you get that information as comprehensively as you can from as many sources as you can so that you can pull it together. And as we spoke to earlier, we want to focus on wellness. And in doing so, we want to look at the dimensions of wellness that that person presents with. So I want to take a quick moment and share this with you.
The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, created the Wellness Initiative to help people with mental and/or substance use disorders, and all people, live longer, healthier lives by focusing on the 8 dimensions of wellness that connect all aspects of behavioral health. Improving wellness by taking action on each of these dimensions addresses early mortality from treatable and preventable conditions. Embracing wellness is about life and living and becoming the healthiest you possible. Listen to your feelings, express them to people you trust, and maintain a positive outlook. Make it a point to understand your finances, establish good financial habits, and plan for the future. A sense of belonging and a reliable support system help during difficult times. Make at least one social connection daily. Seek advice from peers or support groups. And create healthy friendships. Enhancing your connection to self, nature, and others brings balance and peace to your life. Take time to discover what values and beliefs are most important to you. Look for satisfaction from things you're passionate about, whether it is through work, school, or volunteering. Reduce your risk of many illnesses by increasing activity levels according to your abilities, getting restful sleep at night, choosing healthy foods, and exploring outdoors to reduce stress and increase energy levels. Be a lifelong learner by expanding your knowledge and finding creative outlets that stimulate your mind and sense of curiosity. Be open to new ideas, insights, and wisdom. A positive environment has a calming effect. Find surroundings that encourage good physical and mental health, and where you also feel safe. At SAMHSA, we envision a future in which people with mental and/or substance use disorders, and all people, pursue optimal health, happiness, recovery, and a full and satisfying life in the community. Wellness is an ongoing pursuit and can be challenging at times, but striving to make small daily improvements is the key to success. For more information and resources about wellness,
So I'm hoping that kind of lays that framework out for the way in which we look at the person through that wellness lens and those dimensions of wellness. Is this familiar to most folks? Or are most of you familiar with the dimensions of wellness? Or is this the first time for you? It's novel? Just let me know. And don't be afraid. You don't have, no one has to be an expert, or no one has to be afraid or ashamed of saying, Earl, this is new to me. That's fine. It's absolutely fine. And thank you, Jay. This is first time for some folks, and that's fine. And it may be new to some people, but it's important for us to have a sense of looking at a person presenting for service, seeking to enhance aspects of their life through the lens of the wellness dimensions. So we speak to those areas from emotional, financial, social, spiritual, occupational, physical, intellectual, environmental, as the full sense of personhood. And as we spoke to earlier, one specific challenge or impairment in an area can impact other areas of that person's life. Oftentimes, there are needs and challenges in many dimensions of that person's wellness that we have to help them address and be cognizant of as we support them in the pursuit of specific goals. So certainly, I would certainly remind you that if this is unfamiliar to you, you take some time to really look at the wellness dimensions in your own time and really get a good handle on the elements of it. It's a great deal to learn, because oftentimes this also speaks to that connection we can make with person in the early phases. You speak to it in the sense of, listen, you are not just your mental illness or mental health condition. You are a person that has all these dimensions of your life, and we want to take a look at it. Have you looked at, what your financial circumstances are and how that may be impacting your occupation or your physical health? If you're not able to manage your funds very well, are you able to get the medication that's going to require? You get transportation to get to the treatment service that we're sending you to. All these elements have to connect in a way that is meaningful so that people can actually engage in the services that are best to meet their needs. So we want to kind of practice. I want to take a look at this scenario. So I want you to take a look, and for those, I want you to go back so you can quickly look at the dimensions of wellness and just kind of keep it in your head. And Ian says, I've always felt like the spiritual aspect of this is rarely addressed, but it can be super important to certain individuals. Yes, if people have that spiritual element of their life that is significant, and even if they don't, really informing them that there lies that spiritual content they can tune into. It's important in that way. So I want us to take a practice. I want us to just think of an area of wellness in one of these scenarios, right? We think of transportation concerns during, let's say, a few months ago, the pandemic was at its highest, right? Getting transportation during that time when social distancing was such an issue for people. Think of it, transportation in the time of social distancing. I don't know how many people, but you remember that time when we would take 5 clients in a van, to a partial program. And then in the midst of the pandemic, we had to think of social distancing. Do we have that space and capacity to take all those folks? How did it maybe impacted? Hand washing and hygiene during that period. I think of it in the sense that there never was a time in the history of this country where we had so much hand washing stations that we have now. It's become so normal for us that we don't even think of it as a major change from what we used to do and who we were before. But now every place you possibly go, you could probably have some hand sanitizers before you tackle any task. And you think of difficulty paying utility bills or even think of hoarding and stockpiling. So those are some elements of this, right? Let's practice. Let's just look at one of them. Let's look at let's look at hoarding and stockpiling. I hope most of you are familiar with hoarding as a specific challenge, but let's look at hoarding. And we think of those wellness elements as interdependent. They impact each other. And let's just, matter of fact, put away hoarding for a moment. Just ask, what dimensions of wellness may impact apartment applications? When someone is applying for an apartment or seeking to get an apartment, what dimensions of wellness may be impacted by that search? Oh. Robelia says, yes, financial, occupational. And if we look at it from that, social, legal. So there's lots of elements of that person's life. If the person have a physical or a mental health condition that impacts their ability to utilize housing in a certain way, for example, if they need specific accommodations, reasonable accommodations, it certainly may impact their physical or spiritual element of themselves. Environmental, if the person has a history of evictions or so forth, it may have certainly a legal component to it. Now, think in the realm of transportation. A bad credit history may certainly impact that person's life. That may be in the dimension of both the financial and occupational element of it, certainly on the intellectual level. What about transportation? What dimensions of wellness may be impacted by a person who has transportation needs or transportation challenges? Emotional. Yeah, it can be frustrating, aggravating. You may be looking at it through the lens of, because of the circumstance I'm in, this world, this country, this system we live in is not responsive to me. And it may impact that person's sense of purpose and value. Maybe physical. The person has, like I said, certain impairments. They may need transportation with certain assistive devices or assistive systems in place. If they're a recipient of Medicaid, it may be Medicaid-specific transportation, which has its own challenges. Occupational. Certainly, if a person has transportation challenges, it may limit where they can work, how they work, when they work. I think of it from the standpoint, if someone is relying on public transportation in certain areas of Washington, their ability to work an overnight shift for a certain split shift for a differential shift may be challenging given the frequency of public transportation around certain times of the day. Can you think of an example in that element? And I know Washington is vast, so it may be unbelievable in terms of what that presents. Yes, and Quinn says where they can live. If they only have public transportation, they need to be on a bus line, especially if they have a physical disability that makes walking to said bus line difficult. Absolutely. If the bus line ends at a certain place and your apartment or where you live may be a little bit further from the bus line, you may have to get an additional transportation source to get from the bus line to your home. And Andrew says, I've seen this happen in Norway, where a bus shows up once a day. Wow. That is something. And Kyra says, increased anxiety or not being able to make it on time to appointments or miss them altogether. Absolutely. If you're relying on certain transportations, it's maybe hard for you to predict the time to leave and the time you're going to take to get there. It may impact your willingness or desire to actually set an appointment because you don't know if you're going to show up. There's some providers, if you miss 2 appointments, you have to pay a fee or they discontinue services to you. All these elements. So physical, financial, occupational, environmental, physical. Absolutely, Carrie, that is spot on. It is optional or optimal if there's a safe, warm place to stay if someone is waiting for the bus. I can imagine on a very cold day and you stopping at a bus stop without shelter. That can be tough. And just says, yes, Denmark is more organized in that sense. It's good to know. So you have to be conscious and aware of these elements. You know, we think of a person when we say, okay, so you have Medicaid transportation or you have access to transport. Why aren't you getting there? Or we're going to refer you to this specific provider without a conscious awareness to the impediment in that person's life given their circumstances in terms of how do they maximize transportation to get to and from in a safe, meaningful manner. Michelle says, one thing I've experienced with the participants have to set up, dial a ride, and we need to have a pickup time. Sometimes appointments run long, and it was stressful to my participant not to be done with the appointment in the time. Yes. Sometimes that person goes to see a psychiatrist or see a provider, and the person has a tremendous wait time there. And a person may have, the ride share program or the ride transportation program may say you have to schedule the pickup and drop off time. And you have a reasonable prediction that the appointment should be finished at 2:30, but then it's running late. 2:30 comes, you hear the horn outside and your appointment is not done. You can't just pick up and leave, and that then affects it, whether or not you can get home on time. So those are definitely elements. So when we think of things in that manner, we have to look at all the potential impediments or challenges or nuanced circumstances that impacts that person's life across all those domains. When we speak to being strengths-based, we want to identify unmet needs. We want to look at housing and employment, ADLs in the areas of wellness. What are common areas of unmet needs that you see in the clients you serve? Think of it for a moment. When we think of moving from a strength-based perspective, do we look at what are the unmet needs that may be actually presenting for that person? And what are the most common ones that you see? Low income. So there's social needs. Disabilities. Lack of adequate physical, mental health care. Lack of insurance, or even in the presence of insurance, access to a PCP or access to a specialist who may want to take or who may be willing to take Medicaid. So the idea of saying to someone, why aren't you taking better care of yourself as it relates to your diabetes? Without asking that person, what are some of the impediments? What are some of the obstacles to you actually addressing your diabetic needs? And the person may say, listen, there's one endocrinologist in the area that takes Medicaid, and he has a wait list of 6 months, which means I can't get that specialized care because I can't access that specialty, even though I need it.
I'd like to add that the commonality is that somewhere in the community they're lacking in one of the 8 or multiple of the 8 dimensions, and it's figuring out where that is And then, building on what they have and showing them how to use what they have to build on that.
And also recognizing that as a system, it may not be comprehensive enough to meet the needs of the people in specific areas. There are social determinants of health that we talk about in another training that may be impacting that person's ability to maximize their health and maximize their wellness.
Yeah.
There may be forces beyond their control. So just looking at a person's behavior and whether or not it's impactful to their pursuit of their goals may not be enough to really fully understand that person's life. And Carrie says sometimes misinformation about services available due to confusion with complicated systems to access. Yes, health literacy. Think of a person going to a medical provider and getting information and instructions and can't make sense of it. Coming home and actually taking the medication, what they think they should, as opposed to being able to actually clearly follow that prescription. Lots of challenges. And Anastasia says lack of needs due to poor communication skills because of limited socialization for COVID. Lots going on in that element. So when we're focusing on those areas of need, we want to look at strengths from the relevant, there's relevant experiences, existing knowledge, skills. What is that person's current reading skills or competence, so that you're providing information or sharing information in a way that the person can receive it in its best part, right? You don't want to actually provide information that the person can't make sense of or make the most of. Want to make sure it's consistent with that person's state of affairs. Absolutely. Adrian says previous doctors who didn't allow them to feel heard, or just the fact, the reality of the stuff. I don't know about many things, but here in New Jersey, you think of a psychiatrist, a person seeing a psychiatrist, sometimes it's 15 to 20 minutes in that appointment. And it's about, what's your meds? Are you taking these meds? What's your side effects? And before the person can even say, hey, I'm having specific challenges or I'm having adverse side effects, the doctor's like, okay, we'll talk about that next time. Continue to take it. So you can feel not connected or not heard by the provider. Or the beliefs, we have providers who don't believe that people with mental health conditions can be honest or can be, their feedback can be taken as substantial evidence. So there's lots going on. There's discrimination at all levels. So I want to quickly, and we'll just do another 5 minutes of this and then we'll wrap up. I want you to look at a case and I want you to give me a sense as to what you see as unmet needs and what's a real strength that person provides and what's a potential goal for that person. So I want to look at Angela. So Angela is a 27-year-old Chinese-American woman born and living in Seattle. She has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder 1 with delusions. She has lived in the community for the last 3 years with a few short-term hospitalizations. Recently, her primary care doctor informed her she is pre-diabetic, which concerns her since she has relatives with diabetes. She reports when she isn't working, she often sits at home watching TV and eating junk food. The team observes she doesn't cook or have access to healthy food options, partially because she lives close to delis. We'll just say she lives in a food desert, so to speak. There are no supermarkets within walking distance. She reports she always has enough to eat through SNAP and a food pantry. Given that picture of Angela, what do you think is an unmet need for Angela? And what is the strength she brings to the process? And what is the potential goal for Angela? Yep, an unmet need, says Shivana, is nutrition. And I know it's going to be coming at me quick, but I'm going to try to kind of keep up. So resourcefulness, nutrition planning, access to supermarkets or transportation need. Healthy food is unmet, right? Physical limitation, access to an actual grocery store, nutritionist. Can she cook? Community connection, she's needing that. Transportation, nutrition planning, possibly a caregiver. Strength is making sure she has adequate food supply regardless. Absolutely. Cooking healthy meals are taught on what she needs to be healthier. So we see unmet needs in that nutritional domain. And we have to dig a little deeper to determine whether it's simply a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding about addressing predisposition to diabetes, and certainly having that framework. What's the strength we notice is that she utilizes her entitlements and her benefits to access food despite the challenge of not having a tremendous amount of accessible foods. And what's the potential goal? I think we can all agree that a potential goal is to potentially really have more information about addressing the predisposition to diabetes. Potential goal could be becoming more informed about a healthy diet. Potential goal could be really addressing transportation to better access more healthy foods. And Sabrina says letting her know she has options and what those options may be. Meeting with a nutritionist, more support. Because in some regards, when we look at it, she sits at home watching TV and eating junk. There may be a need for greater social engagement, right? To really be able to engage in physical activity that may benefit her physically. Cultural food availability. Oh, that's a song I can sing all day. Yes. What foods does Angela like, and is it available? Even if it's nutritionally sound, is it available to her? And is it culturally prudent and connected to her? Meeting primary doctor to address health concerns and to shop for healthier foods to eat, learn how to cook. And, you know, it's one of those things. Do people have to become a professional chef and have the greatest competence as a cook to actually eat healthy in today's world? No, there's some options outside of, you know, exactly. There's options in terms of eating healthy without having to be, you know, I was about to say Martha Stewart, then I realized that's probably old. We have, what are some of the famous chefs today or folks that are on Food Network? Bobby Flay. You don't have to be Bobby Flay to eat healthy, right? You may actually want to do that. Gordon Ramsay, says Michelle. Thank you. Want to make sure I'm on par with what's going on today. Jamie Oliver. And how is her family? What are some social, is there social connections that she's not utilizing or don't have? So there's wanton areas here where we can look at unmet needs, strengths, and goals. But that's the purpose, that's the foundation of a comprehensive assessment, and an assessment that really informs the process of moving towards developing a service plan. We're not simply looking to create a service plan that is targeted at what the person say they need, but what we truly, in a collaborative way of assessing that person's life, really determine is not just important to them, but a priority. Because that's important to discern. And we'll talk some more about that next week as you address the formulation of the individualized service plan. Because whether or not a person has 4 different areas of needs, it doesn't mean they necessarily see each area of need as a priority, right? Because like most of us, we can all probably eat better and get into better shape, right? But is that a priority when we don't have a job? No, the priority will be getting a job to pay our bills so that we can sustain our housing. So needs have to also be prioritized and determine whether that person is confident and capable and ready to address those needs. I don't want to give away too much of next week, but we'll be focusing on that next week as we look at goals and objectives and interventions and readiness and interventions that are really aligned with that person's readiness and competence. So I'm hoping that this was able to really lend some understanding as to the process of assessment for you. I want to also suggest a wellness worksheet that we use to get you to really get into those dimensions of wellness, to really look at your assessment process in a comprehensive way, really looking at the wellness worksheet. And Emily's put that in the chat. So there's lots of areas that are really going to help you really address those unmet needs, the strengths and the potential goals that that person may actually be working on or desire to work on. So I know it's a lot that came at you today. I wanted to make sure that we kind of target the areas that are going to be more informative to your practice each day. So there's a lot more on the PDF that you'll see. It's great information, but I think it was important for us to really address just the formulation of the assessment, understand the priorities there of the assessment, what is it you really need to focus on, how you engage in best practices in creating a good comprehensive assessment that informs your service planning. So I'm going to ask certainly that you take a few minutes, if you have a few moments, to fill out the evaluation to help us really get some feedback as to how you receive the information, what we can do better, what we can do the same, what we're doing well in terms of informing you and really helping you in understanding the process and really ascribing to the goal and thread. So if you can take that moment, and while you're doing that, I want to certainly speak to the upcoming training next week. Same day, same time, same link. Next week is going to be focused on the individualized service plan components and goal development, really moving from preparation to that action phase of service. And the learning application, what we want you to practice for this week is try using the wellness worksheet that is in the stuff to really apply that to the process of supporting the assessment. We want you to know after, if you try that wellness worksheet, what did you learn from using it? Do you have questions or concerns to provide some feedback in terms of your experience with that wellness worksheet? So I want to thank you, and we appreciate your time and attention and participation in today's training. Once again, as you are aware, this training is hosted by DBHR through the Washington Healthcare Authority. I'd like to remind you again that the slides and a link to the recording of this session and a wealth of other resources are going to be available to you in a follow-up email. The email that you register with will be the email those information will be sent to you. And don't forget to check out Foundational Community Supports newsletter for all things FCS and upcoming training events. So it was, as usual, a blast sharing time with you today and really garnering from you how we could best support you in your continued excellent work with the people you serve. So keep that feedback coming, but thank you so much. And I hope you have a grand rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you. Fantastic. You're welcome.
I'll stop the recording, Earl.
Yes, thank you.